Hi, I'm Lisa,
And I'm Johnny.
and today we're going to talk about movies
Horror movies, to be exact.
because this is Gutted, and that's what we do. Today we're going to be talking about Battle Royale. Came out in 2001, a Japanese film.
Yes. As you can see here, Blu-ray copy on the table. Those
Yeah,
of you who are watching.
with an awesome DVD cover, by the way, or Blu-ray cover, because the cover art on that is completely different than the cover art that was out for like ever.
Right. Yeah. Which I believe was just the logo branded Battle Royale, and maybe like a little bit of the class photo, or what seemingly looks like students in a class photo. But we'll get into what that's all about. If you haven't heard of this film, or I've heard of it, maybe not actually give it a shot. But first of all, I think this movie already started on. There was already controversial. This story
Right away.
It was a novel, actually. I believe it was 1999. A author who was a journalist, and I believe this was their only novel, wrote this, and Japanese Parliament wanted to ban the novel from the get-go. The reasons we'll get into as we describe what the movie's about, but essentially they felt like it was too graphic, sent wrong message with a movie about youth being pitted against each other to essentially kill each other. So,
yeah, I mean, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that it was a novel first, but I did recall seeing lots of warnings in the opening credits of the film where it was, if you're under the age of 15, it was inappropriate. And it's, you know, we have disclaimers like that here, and, PG-13, yada, yada, yada. But it's like one time it's up on the screen and then it goes away and we're all good now. We can watch the film. But this film, in the opening credits, I swear, and I must have seen it like 5 times, where the graphic would come up on the screen. It's like, it is not suitable for anyone under 15. If there's anyone under 15 in your house, they should not be watching this film. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, that's actually a part of the movie, too. It's not just some like add-on on the movie home release version of it or anything. It's like a part of the movie. It's a slate that they edited into the movie. So
yeah, it's not part of the storyline.
Not part of the storyline, exactly. So it's kind of weird to see that. It's not common to see that in movies, but it makes sense considering how from the get-go it was causing a lot of controversy. Supposedly,
I believe it.
Yeah,
I believe it.
Yeah, as and especially at that time too. When the movie came out, they were also trying to ban it as well. So naturally, what do we do as audiences, both in the U.S. and possibly worldwide, when you hear all this controversy? You want to see it, right?
Yeah, you go out and watch it.
It's not going to be a bad thing for the marketing, that's for sure.
And what's amazing is like all these attempts to ban it, to restrict viewership. This film like exploded over time to become a cult classic. Like, I am sure that we are getting people listening to and watching this episode because they saw Battle Royale in the title and they were hooked and they were going to come and be a part of this episode. And those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, this is, if you're a horror movie fanatic, if you're a foreign film fanatic, if you're just a cult classic fanatic, you know this movie because it just stood out as one of the most unique, horrifying storylines of a really long time. And it was so original that somebody else wanted to come and piggyback off the storyline and just fucking rip it off.
Exactly.
I'm looking at you, Hunger Games.
Hunger Games, yes. And it's really amazing to, before we get into the plot and all that, just thinking about the cultural impact worldwide. Even now, almost 20 years later, they've made video games based off of this concept.
Have they really?
Fortnite is the Battle Royale style game. You get dropped on an island and you have...
Son of a bitch.
Yeah. The initial game that I'm a big fan of that I started playing is called PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds. So it's more realistic, but yeah, everyone starts on a plane, you parachute out, you land on an island. You have, in this case, you have no weapons, so you have to go to houses and like grab ammo and stuff. Or a frying pan. A throwback to this. That game was directly influenced by this movie. So
it sounds like it.
It's interesting how the video game industry has tapped into it years later. But even then, though, like you mentioned, Hunger Games. I mean, even on this Blu-ray, Entertainment Weekly says, if you love the Hunger Games, Battle Royale set the stage. So at least they acknowledged that.
Yeah, at least somebody acknowledged it. Because I mean, I don't know where I was when I was watching Hunger Games, but I was pissed. I was thoroughly pissed off that I wanted to storm out and I wanted to cause a riot and just scream at everybody. You don't understand. You want a real like fucking kill or be killed situation. You need to leave this movie alone and go watch Battle Royale.
At least watch that first before you see it.
Because it was like you weren't giving any credit to it, and I could imagine like maybe it's inspired by or something like that. And it would have been nice to have like little nods, tip of the hat in the film, in the story to Battle Royale, like saying, "Hey man, I totally got my ideas from you, so I'm going to honor your film by having these little Easter eggs throughout the film." But they didn't do that.
And no, I believe the creator,
Trash.
she said she had never seen the movie either.
She's a fucking
When
liar.
people ask. Right? I mean, how, yeah, like, I don't know. It is upsetting to me. I see it all the time, thinking back. But, when I think of movies that are borrowed from worlds, like a movie that's already happened overseas in the U.S., it angers me usually when I see that. Like, this is a direct remake, and there's really no nod to the original, like no credit, nothing like that. As much as I love Scorsese, that happened with The Departed. I saw the original Infernal Affairs, and everyone's going crazy because it's Scorsese coming out with this, this drama with Leo and
it was so
Damon.
Celebrated too.
And it was so celebrated, yeah. And at the very least, when he won an Oscar, he at least did acknowledge the Chinese film that came before it. So it's nice to see those little things.
The bare minimum, cool.
Right? Not even like on any marketing for it or like anything like that. So I don't know. It is frustrating. I get angered just as you do when I find out about this. But so shall we get into the movie itself? What is it about?
Yes, please. So this film, if you're familiar with Hunger Games, since we keep talking about it, it's much of the same premise. So you've got kind of like a lottery that happens. So there's been this, not even an uprising, not even like rioting. You just have a whole youth culture that isn't responding to rules and boundaries set forth by the adults, and there's not a lot of like cooperation there, and the youth culture is just kind of doing whatever it feels. And in retaliation, because this angers the adults, the government enacted what's called the Battle Royale Act, right? The BR Act.
BR Act.
And so they hold a lottery, and a class is chosen from a school, and they don't tell the kids anything, and they drop them on an island, and they put collars on them to force them to play the game, and basically tell them they have 3 days, and only one of them gets to walk off the island, period. So what do you do? And they give them supplies. They give them a duffel bag full of stuff.
It's a randomized bag they just give them as they file out of this building where they kept them all.
And you get a weapon.
A weapon, right. A weapon, exactly, quote unquote, because some people get screwed.
Yeah.
They get really
royally screwed.
Yeah. And like, for example, the most famous and hilarious one, the main character getting a pot lid.
Yeah, like a legit, like a stew, like picture a stew pot.
Yeah. The
lid, not even the pot.
No.
Just the lid. But what's funny is like, I was watching that film and I was thinking how stupid it was that he got that was his weapon, but it actually turned out to be really useful.
It was useful, yeah.
Yeah, because he could hold it like a shield. It was so big that he could actually hold it like a metal shield against somebody who had like a hatchet or like a little axe. So yeah, it's a crazy movie. And it's really weird how it starts, because I mean, it doesn't mess around. Like right when it starts, our main character sees their father. Like he's hanging from their living room. So he's committed suicide, and already from the get-go, this poor character, this main character, has a really troubled upbringing, and being thrown into this situation is even more tragic to see. And these characters in the class too, they all seem to have some sort of baggage, or at least personal problems. Issue, yeah. And what's funny is, or unfortunate, at least for especially the students, is like they're not rioting in the streets. They're not throwing Molotov cocktails into buildings and like flipping off the government.
No.
Like they just skip class and
Yeah.
they just decide that they're going to live their life their way, and the adults just like have a conniption
Yeah.
and are like, how dare you?
It's some dystopian setting where I guess it isn't clear what time frame it is, but you can kind of guess it's sort of modern times or the
It's
time
modern, and it's like everything's still perfectly civilized. Like we're not in a post-apocalyptic world or anything
No.
like that. It's just modern day Japan, and the youth culture is rebelling in their own kind of passive way, and the adults are like, well, then we're gonna make you, we're gonna force you, we're gonna use capital punishment, and we're gonna scare you into obeying us. And it's the director was in his 70s.
Yeah, really interesting.
When he decided to make this film,
movie, yeah.
And they say, or what I've read is that his big takeaway from this and his message to everybody was for the youth not to trust adults. That was like the biggest thing, which is kind of obvious, right, in the movie.
Yeah, totally. This authoritarian setting where everything's, the military's there even to make sure that the students are in line. So it's very just like
a police state almost.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing too with this movie. It depends on who you ask, but it can, I hate the people that have seen it and just say, oh, it's just a gore fest. It's just mindless.
How dare they?
Right.
Excuse them.
Yeah, I know, right? And I've seen the negative reviews both online and
what?
That it's it's just mindless violence and these youth are just killing each other, and it's like there's so much more layers to this, I believe.
There is so much humanity in this film. It's unbelievable.
Exactly, and it's really supplemented. That point is supplemented and emphasized with these flashbacks you get from these main characters you end up following, both for the main character but also these characters. And it's one of those moments too where I'll talk about Mitsuko. One of those. I think I keep
love
going
her
back
and hate
forth.
her.
Yeah, right.
But I love the honesty in her background, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy because it's one of those things where you almost hate the character. It's like, oh my gosh, they're taking full advantage of this situation. They just want to kill. And
she's brutal. She's cutthroat, literally.
Yeah, literally cutthroat. But there's a point where you almost again feel bad for how
she got there.
And you see in these flashbacks too, I think it captures how life in middle school and high school is really well too. There's a point in the movie where I'm like, how realistic is this? Would people actually act this way? But then I realized, wait a second, these are youth.
Yeah.
What do they find important in life at that point in time? And they're thrown into the situation. It's kind of crazy. And then you see the outcome,
and it's the 9th grade, so they're roughly about 15.
Right. So
and which is interesting because that's what you see in the warnings of the film. It's like anyone under 15.
Yeah.
But like all the characters, they're supposed to be roughly 15 years old. And 15's right at that age where like, that's where you start to, 15 is right at that age where you start to really discover who you are and developing an identity and a personality that's unique to you and your values. You really start to establish your values. And I felt like this film, in terms of its story, was showing us that the government had been trying to force the youth generation to conform. And if they hadn't made it by a certain age, so like 9th grade was what we kept seeing repeatedly in the lottery of the students who were getting picked. Like if you hadn't conformed by the time you were 15, then you were eligible for this game, for the BR Act, because if you're not going to play by our rules, then we're going to call the herd, basically. And so it was interesting to see that play out on screen because at 15, you're so emotional. So little things are the most important. Things that are just doesn't matter to anyone else or in life in general. They're like the hugest, most impactful part of your daily life. So like so much into this film where each of the characters talking about their crushes.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say that's what you're talking about is juxtaposed by almost when they encounter each other and talk to each other. It's not about how are we going to get out of here. I mean, some characters did that, or how are we going to get out of this situation. It's more like, oh, you had a crush on so-and-so, or you liked this person.
Are you in love with anybody? kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's still of importance to them, and like you said, they're still finding themselves, and it's I think it captures that aspect of growing up in that age really well, and what would teenagers do in that situation.
And it also kind of plays into the innocence factor of and reminding you that even though these horrific acts are taking place, like scene after scene, where these teenagers make this difficult decision, the innocence is still there. There's still kids. There's still these little 15-year-olds who their only way to really hold on to their sense of reality, to cope with the scenario, is to introduce into this world what their past lives were like, which is worrying about who likes me.
Yeah. Which makes it so even more tragic. I think it's just really sad to see. And I think the movie, to avoid just being this depressing violence fest, as I mentioned earlier, what people have described as why they don't like the movie, is that they kind of have these dark comedy moments, I guess.
So if we're gonna start talking about that, we have to start talking about the introduction or the instruction video that they show the class.
That's exactly what this bubbly host
like a video
of this
game.
video is to explain the rules to the students as they're all in this one room trapped inside, to explain to them what the rules are of the game and what they need to do to survive in the span of 3 days. And it's really just, I mean, you got to see it to really take in how I think it's amazing and hilarious at the same time. But
what's
also
a video game
dark
at the time that kind of had that vibe, where you had the little figure in the picture and she's just like jumping and like happy and like,
giving you just so happy, and there's these graphics on the screen, and her voice is high pitched to like kind of give you like this lighthearted, like, this is gonna be fun, everyone.
Yes. So they have the whole island is the government had evacuated people off of this island so that they could use it for this game, and they sectioned it off into like a grid, and each grid has a number and a letter so that you can figure out where you're at. And the game is that each little square on the map can become a danger zone where this collar that they're wearing could just go off. It explodes, and basically you die. There's no surviving.
There's no way around it.
So her way of describing it is, okay, so you guys are wearing these collars, and on the hours of 6 and 12 a.m. and p.m., we'll have danger zones lit up, so you don't want to be there. Like,
yeah, exactly. A little wink or something. It's crazy how they present that, and
it's like, what was that supposed to achieve?
Right. I mean,
in terms of like, if we're in this universe and we're in the government's thinking, what the fuck was the purpose of doing it that way? Why not just have some stone-faced person say, you're gonna die if you don't kill your friends. If you don't kill the people around you, you're going to die.
Yeah.
This is how you stay alive.
It may have been a deliberate choice for that, though. And I'm thinking maybe because it also emphasizes the fact of how disconnected the government is from how the youth actually are. And they think, oh, the kids are going to love this. We're going to show them a character that's really happy, and they'll be all amped up to be a part of this game, and they're wanting to do their best.
Because they want to reintroduce themselves into society and conform to our rules. So this is great.
Yeah, it just shows how their misunderstanding of how the youth is. And I think that's a powerful message, too, because I think, that's a root of a lot of problems in societies where there's a disconnect or a misunderstanding of how the youth are, and that misinterpretation can turn into ways to restrict the youth and restrict just daily lives for people.
I completely agree. I felt like there was a big message there in terms of the different generations not willing to talk to each other or not willing to work together, and whichever, it's usually the older generation that's in power, reacting harshly to it and not wanting to give up their control. Because let's face it, if these kids are 15, they're a few years away from being adults themselves.
Yeah.
And they are the incoming generation. That's the future of your country, and yet you are wiping them out because you don't want to work with them or understand who they are and what they want out of the world they're going to inherit. And so this older generation is just clutching onto their control for dear life. And like, seriously, they'll do anything it takes, obviously by this movie, anything it takes to retain what they understand as a well-functioning government and society, and how those relationships between the public, the youth, and the different generations should coexist. And they're not going to go down without a fight. Yeah. And that's tragic, but it is a reflection of what we see all the time. Yeah. No matter where you're from.
I think it's one of those movies that the message will never get old, with that in mind, everything you described. And with that, I want to give a shout out to some of the characters and the actors and actresses in it. The first being the main villain. Takeshi Kitano is the main, or is his name in real life? Is it the actor? Oh, okay. The main bad guy, the antagonist.
The guy who signed up willingly to be a part of the game?
Well, no, actually, this guy is the teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think he's an embodiment of that, everything you just described a moment ago too. But that actor in particular, I'm a huge fan of. He's kind of started off as a comedian in the 80s in Japan, and then throughout the 90s became more known as like a direct. Well, he's the whole package. He's a director, producer, editor. He edits movies, and he has some Yakuza movies out, like about Yakuza gangs and whatnot. Very violent, but I want to give a shout out to him because I think the way he played that role is just so bizarre but perfect, I think.
It was. I don't think that there's a better way to describe it, because he was so dispassionate with his relationship with his students, except for one, right? The one student who actually gave him the time of day and showed him compassion. Of course, he was a lot nicer to her, but with the other students, like, he's just like smacking them around and like, oh, okay. So if we're going to talk about him in terms of this movie, so we see him once in the film in the very, very beginning, and he seems like a victim of a run-by slashing. Is that what we would call that?
Yeah, he's in the hallways of a school, and a student just pops out and slashes him on the back of the leg, and
that's it. Nothing happens. The kid doesn't get in trouble. He just leaves the school, and so we don't see him again until these kids, who, by the way, the only way that they could get them to the island was by lying and saying they were going on a field trip. Yeah. And got them all onto a bus, and then gassed them to knock them out, and then transported them all on to this abandoned building where they were going to be introduced to the game. And this teacher walks out, and he's fucking pleased as a peach to be there.
Yeah,
he's so happy to be the guy to have to deliver the news. And he just has zero sympathy. And so when these kids start freaking out exactly how any kid would, how we would.
It's so unbelievable at one point that one student just kind of laughs for a second, like, are you
serious?
You're
joking. And you have to be joking. Well, one kid is like freaking out, right? And she is like, I don't know what she's doing, but she's just in hysterics. And he's just tired of listening to it. So what does he do? He just whips out a knife, throws it across the room, just hits her right in the head, and she just drops dead.
Just like, it was like...
Great
nothing.
Aim, by the way.
Yeah,
some
right.
skill.
Yeah.
That was a little
whip hand
unbelievable.
they did, and just all of a sudden it's like in her head.
But I mean, the shock factor of what's happening and his, disconnect from them.
Exactly. Yeah. So just wanted to make sure I mentioned that character because it was very bizarre and a great performance. Also, Chiaki Kuriyama, who plays Gogo Yubari from Kill Bill, she's in this movie too. Kind of a small part. But it was interesting to see that was the role that Quentin Tarantino saw to inspire him to cast her.
Well, she was absolutely fierce in that role. As small as it was.
As small as it was, she's really it made the most of that time on screen. And
her story was that, she does have a small part. She doesn't stand out a lot, and the story follows her briefly because it's her part in the story. It's her time to shine. And so she runs into one of her classmates who claims that he's in love with her, and in this heightened state of panic, fear, adrenaline, whatever it may be, he starts confessing his love to her. Right. And then when she rejects him, he then goes forward with threatening her and basically saying, I could force myself on you if I wanted to. Instead of freaking out and screaming and running through the woods blindly, she stands her ground. I mean, she's a wicked strong character. She stands her ground. She faces him and says, you're not going to do shit.
I believe the line, at least that I've read in all the versions I've seen, is she says, every inch of me will resist you.
I love that line.
Yeah.
That was so good.
Yeah.
And she ends up like toe to toe with him and then brutally stabs him to death in the most perfect way.
I think what online communities have called that kill is the crotch kill. At least I've saw that.
That's appropriate.
I don't know. Should we let the audience just kind of imagine what happens there?
If you've seen the film, then you know exactly what we're talking about. If you haven't, then this will probably prompt you to go, at least want to go check out that scene. So maybe we'll just leave it there.
And that is one brutal kill out of many in this movie. We don't have time to go through all of them, but gosh, there's some pretty wicked scenes, and you don't really see all of them. I guess you just kind of some of them. Well, what they do is they give out like a daily report of who's dead. Like, hey, your classmate number 40 is dead. And
they list them off by boy and girl. So like boy number 4 and then name. And it was really weird. But they're just like reading off these recaps at every time that they're going to announce like the new danger zones in around the island. And one of the deaths scenes that really got me was right away, because the thing about this film was that it, and like most horror films, it kind of exposes the types of people, who they really are. Yeah. Right. And I think that's one of the big draws, is the mystery as an audience member, to kind of put yourself there and make you wonder, truly, what kind of person are you and what would you do in this scenario? And we saw a bunch of different things happen with the character. So all these variations in what a human being would do kind of played out in this film. And at the very, very beginning, it's like this kid, he gets his bag, he goes right outside. He's one of the first ones out. And he wasted no time. I mean, he was completely freaked out by what he was up against. But it was like, it took him 0 seconds, like 0.2 seconds, to decide exactly what kind of person he was and how he was going to handle this. Yeah. Even though he had completely broken down and he was not okay with anything that was happening, his gut instinct, his survival instinct, was to play the game. And he got a crossbow as his weapon.
He did.
And the first person who followed right after him, he shot through the neck. Yeah. And there was no hesitation. There was no this, like, maybe we should all work together. Maybe we should, like, rally to our forces together and try to figure our way out. We've got 3 days, right? Yeah. They can only force us so much. Let's try to figure this out. But no, you saw the person completely fold, that personality that was going to give in and say, okay, so it's me versus you or me. I'm choosing me. And that happened in a heartbeat.
Yeah. It was that panic, and just, can't even imagine how one's mind would think in that situation. Like,
fight or
I'm the
flight,
first one out. I have a crossbow. Should I just hang out and wait for the rest to come out? And I think that's probably...
just pick them off?
Yeah, and that was probably the initial thought process. And then you do see what you described, like some of the students, as they survive a little bit longer than others, call for, hey, let's work together. Let's figure this out. And, some took full advantage of that instinct that, no, I want to kill, or, hey, let's try to figure this out. And I think for the most part, the students want to do that. I think one that was really sad, super sad, and just like was hard to watch, was the one where the 2 students that were together decided to jump off a cliff together. Yes. Because it's like, I'll never play this game. I'll never kill anyone. Yeah. And I don't know. It's weird. This movie like really plays with your emotions, because I don't know. I feel like it's ultra violent, but then it's like, oh my gosh, these are kids like doing this to each other.
And I think going back to that whole, these trivial little conversations of, oh, you had a crush on this person, didn't you? Or, are you in love with anybody? It just, those moments really bring the audience back around to, who are these characters? They're not hardened killers. They're not criminals. They're not even like fully functioning independent people.
Right.
They're 15.
Yeah.
And you are telling them, the government is telling them that their only choice is to kill each other if they want to be able to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy to see what the characters are going through. And I think the writer and the director really explored those characters really, really well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you have some that don't want to participate. You have some that their fight or flight kicked in and they chose to, and it was fight. You know, you had flight where some tried to hide and try to wait it out, or like some who really dug deep and tried to resist 100% and just fell for the game anyway. Like the girls who rescue our lead.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that's one of my top favorite scenes in the movie. Are you referring to the lighthouse and
I am.
the cooking scenes? Yeah.
I am.
That one's just the worst possible scenario can happen when you're trying to be with a group of friends to figure this thing out together and to survive, and for all that to go to hell, you know, in the heartbeat.
It snowballs,
snowballs,
and it all came down to distrusting the person next to you.
It's the distrust of one person that led to bad outcomes, really. You know, once you I want to kill this person, but I don't want to hurt the others. It does impact everyone. And
there's no good outcome, basically.
Yeah, exactly. If you're gonna, kind of goes with, live by the sword, die by the sword. You're gonna use violence. You're gonna do that. You can't call the shots for what's gonna be the outcome of that. And I think, that's kind of delving into a scene, thinking more in layers,
like philosophically.
But maybe they were going for that, maybe they're not. But that's just something that came to mind when I watched.
I mean, it makes perfect sense because you saw elements of distrust throughout the film, and there was even one particular death that it flashed on the screen for like half a second, but it was enough to hit me pretty hard. And it was the two girls who tell each other they're always going to be friends even though they're being separated, and then it cuts to their death and they killed each other.
Yeah.
And we have no idea how that happened or how they got there.
Just the aftermath.
But the aftermath, and it very well, based on everything we were watching, like it easily could have been a distrust scenario, because once that seed is planted, it's toxic. It's almost impossible to stop.
Yeah. And speaking of that too, there is that group of really nerdy kids.
Oh, I love them.
One of them, the hacker. I know how to he figures out that there's microphones in the collar.
Yeah, wicked smart, because his uncle was like some kind of rebel fighter.
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
Like
and that was neat to see too. Like there was inspiration there. He used that as to we can get out of this. Let's figure out a way to blow up the whole headquarters.
I mean, that kid was genius, and it just makes you think and it makes you kind of frustrated, because it's like if all those kids just got together and decided that they weren't going to be instruments in this cruel game, that they could have banded together and put their skills together and
probably would have gotten
out.
Yeah, that's really tragic to see too. Like the what if, there's some parts where they're so close to finding a way to survive and get out of there, and then that makes me think of as if all of this isn't enough. They decide to throw in these other characters,
the transfer students
who supposedly volunteered to take a part in this too.
One of them volunteered. He willingly signed up to be a part of the game, and the other guy survived a previous game, but they dragged him back in. And they kind of represented opposite ends of the spectrum of those reactions and of the types of personalities in these environments, or of human nature.
Yeah, exactly. And it's while they both volunteered, there is a contrast. One's very, I guess you can describe as psychotic, just wants to kill and win, and no rhyme or reason to join other than that.
Purely believe he signed up just for a legal opportunity to go on a killing spree.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other character who signs up, you get to know is a little bit more
compassionate.
I was going to say lighthearted, but that's perfect too. But it's kind of weird to say in a situation someone would volunteer. But yeah, no, I like where they went with both of those characters. I think it was a great contrast and threw in an interesting dynamic into the whole situation as well. I got to give a random shout out to, I was mentioning earlier, but there's this band I love from Japan called Duran Gray. They're a heavy metal band. And I was totally shocked to read this, but the lead singer for that band was offered the role of the psychotic character.
Really?
But his talent agency said, you're not going to do it. So I'm like, oh my gosh, in an alternate universe.
He must be pissed now.
Yeah.
Like that should have been him.
So yeah, lead singer Kyo is his name. I would have loved to have seen that, but regardless, though, this movie already, I mean, it's just crazy enough.
I mean, the acting chops of everybody. I mean, everybody. It wasn't just your leads. It was all the way through to the bottom of the cast, where somebody may have been on screen for 2 minutes, but he or she nailed it.
Yeah, exactly. And another interesting fact, I guess every one of the actors and actresses in this did their own stunts.
Are you serious?
Yeah, there was no stunt doubles. So if they're falling down or doing something crazy, that was
tumbling,
all them.
rolling down the hill.
Exactly. And awesome. I believe it was 800 youth auditioned for this, and there's 42 students on the island, so they had to dwindle that down. But yeah, I can imagine it's crazy. Like 800. Can you imagine auditioning for that?
Yeah, 800 though. If you think about it, like. Aren't we seeing like the huge disconnect in the creation of this film? Yeah. You had the youth culture ready to go, believed in the story, wanted to be a part of it in such a large number to help get it made, and then you had the government trying to shut it down.
Yeah, it's crazy. We didn't even see it in the U.S. officially until 2011, I believe, right? Like theatrically, and I think I think it was mostly because of. Disagreements between the production company and distributors in the U.S. weren't coming to terms with it, but people were already bootlegging it, and it was going
or like
around
finding
already.
Like weird ways to get it. Because I had a buddy of mine had gotten like a special edition DVD, in the early 2000s, and he had to go the longest route to get it, and it took forever for him to finally get a copy. And then somewhere years later, I was walking through Hot Topic, and I saw like a collector's edition, and it like blew my mind.
Dang. Kudos, Hot Topic.
I know.
They have really still going strong with cool stuff, but yeah, I don't know. So I recommend this movie to anyone a fan of horror, foreign films. I mean, and just the message itself, I think a lot of people will find it extremely interesting. But you gotta have I guess you kind of have to be in a mood for it too, I suppose.
You do, because it is an emotional
depressed.
roller coaster ride, and you have to be willing to go through it. And it's intense. It's a lot to take on. It's a little long too, because I watched the extended version to prepare for this, and that was like 2 hours long, which actually in today's market, like most movies are getting
standard,
to be that. Yeah,
it's not longer. I don't think this version, which is the version I've seen, I believe I saw the director's cut years ago, but I picked this up. Anchor Bay Entertainment has this release, and I just had to pick it up because I didn't have it in my collection for Blu-ray.
Oh, you gotta have it,
I had to pick it up, even if it's not like the director's cut or whatever. But I'd love to see the director's cut again. I'd have to see what the actual differences are, but definitely the length seems to be the big one.
Yeah, I think it's only the difference is only about like maybe 20 minutes.
20 minutes or
maybe.
So. Yeah.
But this film for me, like when I watched it just after it was released. I don't know how a friend of mine got a copy of it, but it was early 2000s. Watched it. It totally opened up doors for me in terms of film, in terms of different kinds of film, and broadened my concept of what could be considered horror, and really just introduced me to the potential and the powerful storytelling of like Asian films, Japanese, Korean, I mean, you name it. I feel like they have a better handle on horror and storytelling than we do.
Yeah, this movie, same too. It was like the benchmark for like movies of this style. If a violent, horror film of some sort would come out, or maybe even from Asia or other country, I'm always like, it didn't quite make me feel like Battle Royale did. I always think back to Battle Royale. So this movie, huge.
It is a
impact on me,
comparison.
too.
Yeah, everything I watched.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like a set core of foreign films that I will that will be the marker for. Did it hit the top tier, what I feel is a top tier horror film or action film? And it'll be these like core, I mean, like, we don't have to get into it, but I mean, like Audition,
yes.
Old Boy.
Old Boys, yeah, exactly.
Battle Royale is right up there.
They make you feel some kind of way, like, oh my gosh.
Make you feel some kind of way. Yeah, that is right.
So, yeah, well, with that, if you have any recommendations for any horror films from overseas that you think maybe we haven't seen, or maybe we have, just throw it our way. Email us, comment on on our social media. Let us know to check out some movies. We'd be happy to look into it too.
Yeah, we do have an email address if you want to send us those recommendations. You can send it to guttedreviews@gmail.com, and you might just see us reviewing it on a future episode.
Nice. Well, with that,
We'll see you next time.
see you next time.